Hey everyone, and welcome to the first video of my Minecraft texturing tutorial series, where I teach you how to make everything in the world of texturing, from items to blocks to mobs to Optifine features. We're going to start off the series with the most iconic of Minecraft items, the sword. Everything I do in this series will be mainly done through Aseprite, which I'll link down below, so make sure to get that if you want to follow along exactly. Remember to like and subscribe if you like what you see, and with that said, let's get right into it. Alrighty guys, I'm going to try to do this in one take because that's how I do it on stream and that's the way I'm used to doing it. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to set up a blank canvas. I like to set up a regular, just close to black background. It's not exactly black. You can see I'll eyedropper it. It's not exactly black. It's a little bit tinted blue, but it's what's comfortable for you here that matters. If you like to work on a black background, you can. I prefer it, but I do occasionally work on a checkered background, which I use to measure 16 by 16 squares. Additionally, if you don't like that, if you don't like making your own squares, you can go up to View and click Show, and you can enable the grid here. So I think I'm going to use this for the purpose of this video. Let's get right into it. The first thing that you want to do with any pixel art, this applies to any pixel art in general, is you're going to want to figure out the silhouette, the outside shape of an object. So when you notice an item, the first thing you notice is going to be the outside shape. And in the case of a sword, you want something that immediately reads to the player or to the viewer as a sword. So the simplest way to do that is to get your line tool with either L or over here on the side. And you're going to want a 2 pixel wide handle at least. I would suggest sticking to 2 pixels, and then somewhere between 4 pixels or 6 pixels for swords, depending on how big you want it to be, really. You could also do 3. I think I'm going to do 5 for this one, actually. I want it to be pretty hefty, pretty chunky. Actually, that's too big. Let's do 4. Let's do 4. Okay, so let's do 4. And now, the second most important thing is to really spend some time here. You really want to make sure that you like the shape of your sword before you get into shading, before you bog yourself down with color. This is the simplest way to get your idea across and your imagination across without having to worry about anything else. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to get something a little interesting. Not going to take too much time here because I want to get right into what you most likely want to see the most, which is shading. I don't like how small this handle is, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna stretch this out a little bit. Shrink this. All right. So I like to make my handles at least 3 pixels here on the edges. Otherwise, I feel it's too small and it doesn't fit properly into the player hand. But if you like bigger handles, you can go for it. If you like smaller handles, go for it. Remember, it's your sword. I'm just giving you the basics so you can make your own stuff. Okay, so once you've got the shape on the outside, the silhouette, you're going to want to start slapping on some base color. And this part's pretty simple, really. You're just going to want to differentiate all the different parts of your item here. So a sword has a handle, a crossguard, and a blade. So you're just going to want to, pick out some colors here. You don't have to be too picky here. You can spend as much time blocking in colors, and you can always change these while you're shading. If for whatever reason you decide it doesn't look good enough, you can always change these while you're shading. But I like to pick the finalized colors that I'm sure an item will use at this stage, just because I can make my decisions very quickly because I've been making textures for so long. But it's okay. You can take as long as you need to. You can take as little amount of time as you want. It's your sword. You can do what you want with it. All right. So now that you've got the base color slapped down, you can get into shading. So let's copy this over. The most important thing with shading, Minecraft swords in specific, is that you're going to want to figure out where the outlines are going to be, because Minecraft items have outlines. They're not black outlines all the time, but most of the time they're either selective outlines or they're outlines that share the color with the inner working of the item. So for example, if it's a gray sword, it's going to have a gray outline. If it's a gray handle, if it's a brown handle, it's going to have a brown outline. If it's a red apple, it's going to have a red outline, or a brown outline in some cases. But for the most part, the outline matches the color of the inside base color that you've chosen. And it's not that simple, but it's okay. I'm going to walk you through it. Another thing you need to keep in mind is that the outline changes depending on how close it is to the player. So the side of the item that is closer to the player has a darker outline, and the side of the item that is furthest from the player has the brightest outline. But the outline will always be darker than the inner part of the item. So let's set up the outline for this. You're usually going to want to give yourself some space to work here. So I would suggest finding a decently dark color in your palette and setting up the back outline first, and then working your way up into the bright outline. So there we go. We're probably going to change these. Remember, these aren't set in stone. You can always change these as you work. So once you've got these outlines, it's a lot easier to decide for yourself how you're going to shade the sword. So for example, if you want a line going up the middle, like a lot of Minecraft items have, specifically tools and stuff have a lot of lines that act as like edges. So if you imagine a box, a lot of Minecraft items have this sort of like edge here that they use to symbolize sort of like a sharp edge. It's meant to symbolize that, but instead of using a bright pixel, they use a dark pixel. So they'll do something like this. This is a Mojang style, or at least what I've sort of analyzed it myself to be. If you disagree, you can disagree, but I feel like every item has some sort of edge in it, and they usually signify the edges with dark pixels. So if you want to do the Minecraft style, this is how you do it. And now, once you've got the edge figured out, I like to start with the bright highlight. Actually, I usually start pretty bright here because I really like having really defined edges. And most importantly, it'll tell me if my inner part of the sword is too dark, and it is. I've decided it's too dark. Let's lighten this up a little bit. Okay. So now, you're probably going to want to add a gradient to the center line here, because you don't want it to be too dark. You don't want it to call too much attention to itself. So let's lighten this up a little bit. Obviously, a lot of what I'm doing here involves a decent-ish palette. And, well, I guess I could teach you a little bit about colors in a later video, but for now, I'm going to be working with the assumption that you've already gotten a semi-decent palette for yourself. Anyways, so once you've got this sort of gradient line going up the center, I like to use this to inform the shading of the rest of the sword. So for example, if the gradient on the center line starts getting darker right around here, I like to make the sword darker right around here. And this accomplishes two things mainly. One thing is that I like to make my swords get darker as they get closer to the hilt, to add some segmentation, some separation between the blade and the handle. I feel like it gives it a lot of interest. So that's why I like to do this. I think it looks good, and that's why I'm teaching it to you guys. So once we've got that figured out, that's pretty much the basic shading of the sword. To recap, you do the outline on the back, darker than the inside. You do the outline on the front, darker than the inside still, but brighter than the back outline. And then you add your center line, and then you add your highlight along the tip of the sword. This is just to like really show the viewer, the player, that it's sharp. Oh, another thing that I messed up on, and I always mess up on this, you usually want this line to be below the bright line. Again, this makes it look sharper than it otherwise would be if you did this. This might be a personal thing, but I feel like it looks sharper like this. So now that I look at this line needs to be a little bit lighter. Just a little bit. And okay, Okay. Now we're just about almost done with the blade. I like to finish the blade before I move on to the handle or the crossguard because the blade is the eye-catching part of the sword. This is the part of the sword that the player sees the most because it's sticking out the edge of the screen when you're playing. So you want to spend some time here. So let's look at this. I usually like to make my swords hug the crossguard here, but the best way to do that is to first add some separation between the crossguard and the blade. So what I like to do is I like to do a dark line separating the crossguard and the blade to sort of segment them away from each other so that the viewer can easily distinguish what is crossguard and what is blade. So that's what I'm going to be doing here, just separating, doing this sort of dark line going all the way around. And now that I've done this, I can easily go like this and add even more separation. And as you can see, it creates sort of like a nice little dynamic between the crossguard and the sword. This I feel is kind of held up the test of time, and it honestly, I think a lot of people who have seen me make these swords on stream really appreciate this style. So now that we've got the crossguard, we want to shade it in the same way we did the blade. So you want it to be darker as we get to this direction and brighter as you get to that direction. So that's what I'm going to do right there. That's simple. And you want to brighten up this outline right here, but you still want it to be darker than this for the most part, or even the same color really. So you can pull a color from the blade and drag it down over here, and that's the crossguard. Sorry for that. I've been getting a bit of a sore throat, so all right. So that's the crossguard. And now that you've got a simple sort of shaded crossguard, you're going to want to add some detail to this because this looks a little flat as it stands. And one way you can do this is by just adding like a little glitter here on the edge. It's like a nice little sparkle, makes the crossguard look a little shiny, adds an interesting pixel to look at. It's just a very versatile pixel to add. Another thing you could do is add a little bit more shadow on the crossguard. Now here, for example, you could add it here to keep with the idea that the sword should get darker as you get this way. But you can also do something completely different here. You can put it in the center. And what this does is add a little bit more intrigue to the item. It doesn't really make sense with lighting, but if you look at it, it's sort of visually aesthetic. Visually, you can see this, and I don't have the words for it, but this just looks interesting to me. So obviously, this is if you're following along, you can make your sword like this, you can make your sword like this, you can make your sword completely different, but the principle is the same. As long as you adhere to this idea that your texture should be darker over here and brighter over there, whatever you make is going to look good. And as long as you took some time on these two stages, you should have something by now that looks reasonably good. So I'm just going to add this pixel here and work our way into the handle. The handle is the easiest part. You're just going to want to highlight the pixel in the center. It's really that simple. And same principle here. You make this pixel darker than this pixel. And that's it. This is a little bit extra that I like to do, but I like to add some grain to the handle. I'll do something like this. And it adds a little bit of grain to the handle, a little bit of texture. If it's brown, it looks like wood grain, and if it's any other color, it just kind of looks like a wrapping. So I'll show what that looks like. Let's get that in the middle of a 16 by 16. All right, so let's say we made this red. Make it red. You see, it kind of makes it look like a highlight now. Now it looks like it's like wrapped or something, and it's, I don't know, it's just something I like to do. It's part of my style, but I'm making these videos so that you can learn from my style and apply it to your style if you want. And it's really that simple. The reason we could change, oh, by the way, the reason we could change the coloring of this handle and not affect the rest of the texture too much is because we did this sort of a modular design where the crossguard is very separated from the blade and the crossguard is very separated from the handle. If, for example, you did something like this, right, where the pixel sort of blends into the crossguard, something like this, you would have a lot more difficulty just changing this color, right? So I like to make textures that are very modular, something that I could just swap things in and out of. So for example, I could easily change the color of this handle and just swap it out, right? And this makes it a lot easier to make textures for FRP and makes it a lot easier to change my decisions after I've made the item based on user feedback or Rumpo feedback. You know, the carrot sometimes gives feedback to me. So anyways, that's a sword in about, I want to say 15 minutes probably. I'm gonna cut out some parts where I mess up my words, but for the most part, this has been one take of the Minecraft texturing tutorial series, and I hope I see you next time. Hey guys, I hope you liked watching this as much as I liked making it, and I hope you came away with something new that you can apply to your own pixel art. Make sure to follow me at my various social media accounts, and make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, comment down below as to what you want to see me do next.